Let's take a look at how the Wolfram language handles projections. We don't have a lot of time, but I want to make sure that I at least touch on it so you can see what it can do, because obviously projections are so important to GIS and mapping. So we were doing something with a GeoGraphics earlier, which allowed us to bring up a map. For this, I want to introduce you to the Geo Range option here. And Geo Range is an option for the styling of our maps that specifies a range of latitude and longitude to include on the map. And you can specify that by latitude and longitude, or you can specify that by naming an entity region that it understands. So in this case, let's say I want to create a map of the entire world. So I'm going to say GeoGraphics because I'm bringing up a map, and I'm going to specify that my Geo Range is going to be the entire world, because that's an easy way to look at the differences of projection. I'm going to use this arrow here, and I created this arrow by clicking the hyphen key and then using the greater than sign. And when I put both of those together, it creates that arrow. It also brings up some options for me, and as it happens, yes, world is exactly what I want. And so I'm going to close my brackets. So GeoGraphics to bring up the map, and I'm saying of a range of the entire world using that arrow that's created by the hyphen and the greater than symbol. And let's execute. By default, I'm getting a world map here in an equal rectangular projection. I tell you what, let's get a little bit fancier with this map by adding something to it that also helps us to see the effect of projections. So let's add a Geo Path in there between two different cities. So GeoGraphics, and I want to plot a Geo Path like we did earlier, and I'm going to send it Moscow and Washington, D.C. And I want to specify that this needs to be plotted on Geo Range of the world. Okay, so there we go. As you can see, it's laying in that shortest path distance between the 2 points that I specify. Now, let's see what we can do with manipulating projection. I'm just going to copy this down, because we're going to be working with all that again. Now I'll put an additional option after the Geo Range world, and that is going to be Geo Projection. And I will use the same arrow notation. And look at that, it understands what I'm trying to do, and it brings up a whole list of projections that it understands and that I can just immediately include. So let's do a Mercator. There we go. I'll copy this down for another option. Let's use a Robinson projection, good compromise projection. And now, just for the sake of it, let's do an Albers projection. There. If we want, we can really dig into these projections, and I think that's fantastic, because I like the way that we can manipulate them and make sure they're right for our purposes. So let's demonstrate that now. And what I'm going to do is recreate what we just did, but when I do it this time, I'm going to use kind of a better coding format. Rather than typing one long string all the way across the screen, what I'm going to do is kind of organize it better using tabs, so it's a bit more readable, kind of a good coding practice. So let's go back to creating a GeoGraphic, and we want to create a Geo Path. And then what I'm going to do is hit comma, and then return. Remember, when I hold down Shift and return, that executes the line of code. I don't want to execute it, I just want to drop down to the next line as I'm typing. So I'm just going to hit return. Now I'm on the next line. I'm going to say Geo Range World. Drop down to the next line. Geo Projection. We were using Albers. Let's execute. Looks good. But this time let's modify this so that we add some customization to the projection, like adding a custom center to the projection. Rather than centering it in its default location, let's center it in a location we specify. So there is an option here called centering, and I'll use the same arrow notation there. And then we're going to center it on a particular geo position. And I have the coordinates for Washington, D.C. saved, so I'll just copy those in, and then close out geo position. Let's also specify our standard parallels. So I'm going to drop down to a new line. Oh, I want to make sure that I close my geo position there. Now I drop down to the next line, and let's say standard parallels, and let's make them at 30 degrees north and 50 degrees north. And I believe actually I'm going to have to put all of my options here in braces. Or at least I like to do that, because this is all a specification of my geo projection. This is the Albers projection with a certain centering and a certain standard parallel. Let's recompute. Let me add in a comma here. There we go. So as you can see, we've now recentered this projection on Washington, D.C., and we've also specified our standard parallels. What if we wanted to display the standard parallels on the map? Let's do something we haven't done before, which is add multiple geopaths to our map here. We have the geopath going between Washington and Moscow, but let's add a geopath along each one of the standard parallels. So up here where I'm at geographics, I'm about to send it a whole bunch of geopaths, 3 geopaths to be specific, so I'm going to open a pair of braces right in front of geopath, and then I'm going to close it over here, and then put another comma, because I'm going to separate each one of these geopaths with this comma right here. So I'm going to open another geopath, and it has a bracket, and then a brace, and then I will say parallel, and 30, and it understands that I'm trying to put a geopath along the 30th parallel, and of course I used a positive number, so that's 30 degrees north, the same as the standard parallel that I just used. I will say comma again, and then let's do another geopath along 50, and that's degrees north. That should be all of the geopaths I need, so I'm going to close the braces around geopath, and then put in a comma. So now I'll be dropping down to my Geo Range specification and also my projection specifications. When I execute, you see now I have 3 geopaths. I'm illustrating the standard parallels and also that geopath between Washington and Moscow. While we're working here, now that we have 3 different geopaths displayed on the map, what if we wanted to style them? I mentioned that you could. Let's say that we want the geopaths for the standard parallels to be red, and then the geopath between Moscow and Washington to be green. We can do that by wrapping it in a style function. So I'm going to go over here before the geopath between Washington and Moscow, and say I'm going to be styling this geopath, and that I want it to be, we want that one to be green, right? And then close that bracket for style. And now you can see that I'm back in the geographics. Let's go ahead and execute that. And that does come up green. Not quite as easy to see, but it did turn it green. Let's do the same thing over here for the parallels. Let's say style. And it turned them both red. Notice how I did that. I started that style tag again, and rather than wrapping style around both of those geopaths, I wanted to apply this same style to both geopaths, so I wrapped both geopaths in the braces right here, and then I said style, open brackets, gave it both geopaths, closed my braces, put a comma, and then said just red. And then I closed that bracket for the style. So that might look a little bit sophisticated, but we did step our way through it, and I think you can figure everything out, and it kind of makes sense as you go across. It is much more human-readable than many other programming languages. And of course, this is just kind of a sample here to show you its capabilities. All of these different functions and options are available in the Wolfram language documentation. When we come back, we will be looking at some more data manipulation.